Imagine this. Every time the Bible says Vayeshev, someone tries to settle down and the story darkens. It's no coincidence. It's a warning, a sign, a profound call that transcends generations. Because in the Torah, settling down isn't just about living in a place. It's about seeking a comfort that lulls you to sleep, a rest that stops your growth, a tranquility that can cost you your spiritual life, and perhaps even your physical life if the place where you settle down is marked by disproportionate violence and injustice. In this class, we will study why Vayeshev is a dangerous word, and why every time it appears, the sages point out that crises, ruptures, family conflicts, moral failings, or even exile follow. And it's not just ancient history, it's a mirror. Each of us has an internal Vayeshev, that point where we say, I've done enough, I'm fine now, I don't need to change anymore. That's precisely where the real problems begin. And there's an even older secret, hidden in another parasha. Lech Lecha. Abraham is commanded to leave your land. Leave your familiar territory. Leave the comfort you inherited. Because Abraham doesn't become Abraham while settled in Ur of the Chaldees, surrounded by idolatry, violence, and moral decay. It is his own father, Terah, who initiates the departure from that stable but deadly land. Abraham discovers that staying in the same place, without evolving, was the true destruction. And now look at the mysterious parallel. In the parasha Lech Lecha, the divine voice says, get up, move forward, transcend, emigrate. In Vayeshev, the text shows us that when one settles down too much, one falls. One parasha is like a positive commandment, get up and go. The other is a negative commandment, do not settle down, do not fall asleep, do not become complacent. But in the first case, it's a direct commandment. In the second, they are synonym, signs that should show you the way, your evolution in this life, because your soul and that of your family and loved ones came to this world, to this life, to do many things, but they all point to one, to gain merit or to evolve. No matter how you want to see it, but we came to this world for that, and if we don't, the sensors, the synonym, the signs are activated, and life itself breaks our plans so that we don't settle down and continue on our path, which is the only reason why souls incarnate in this world. The sages teach that in this life, we don't come to seek comfort, although we can enjoy temporary comfort and pleasures. That is allowed because God placed man in Eden so that he would be happy. But that pleasure or happiness does not mean that we stop growing and evolving, because we come to gain merit, grow, transform ourselves, and overcome trials. True peace is not comfort. It is the spiritual victory that only comes when you keep walking. Do you know why there are souls in torment? Because they can no longer continue gaining merit or evolving and remain stagnant between low spiritual and mental worlds. It's not the topic today, but you should know that after death, according to Judaism, the opportunity to increase your reward ends. If you want to understand why settling down can be more dangerous than exile, why comfort can destroy more than persecution, and why the secret message of Vayeshev is actually another Lech Lecha, watch this complete class. You will discover that the greatest risk is not failing, but ceasing to move forward. This is Abel Flores speaking. Thank you for being here. Please don't leave, because this class could be the spark that allows you to break your spiritual stagnation, or, even better, accelerate your chariot. Now we will give a brief summary of this parasha, its themes and concepts. Allow me to invite you to enter this parasha with me, like someone who opens an ancient door and unexpectedly finds a mirror. Because Vayeshev, although it speaks of shepherds in Canaan and dreams in Egypt, actually speaks to us about our loyalties, our envies, our silences, and our decisions when no one is watching. And it all begins with an almost domestic tension. Jacob settles in the land of Canaan, and one would think that after so many adventures he would finally have peace. But no, the Torah, expert in ironies, reminds us that the greatest war is not always external. Sometimes it is the one fought around a family table. Jacob's favoritism towards Joseph, reinforced by that special tunic, the ketonet pasim, literally a coat with wide sleeves, a symbol of distinction, awakens in the brothers a mixture of jealousy and humiliation, and one can almost hear that charged silence, that discomfort that we have all experienced at some point when injustice becomes visible and no one knows how to name it. Joseph, a brilliant and perhaps somewhat naive young man, fuels this tension with his dreams. The sheaves bowing down to the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars prostrating themselves. In Hebrew, Vaysaper elechav, and he told his brothers, sounds almost like an innocent gesture, but one laden with destiny. Dreams, which in Jewish tradition can be echoes of the divine, here function as an uncomfortable announcement. Joseph is called to something great, and greatness is rarely well received by those who feel relegated. Then comes the conspiracy. The brothers, moved by accumulated resentment, plan to get rid of him. Reuben tries to save him, showing that even in the most tense narratives, there is always a voice that seeks another path. Judah, more pragmatic, proposes selling him, and so Joseph ends up in the hands of Ishmaelite merchants on his way to Egypt. The scene darkens when the brothers present Jacob with the blood-stained tunic, and one feels the weight of that lie, a kind of lie that is not forgotten because it destroys something sacred: trust. Just when the reader expects to continue Yosef's story, the Torah takes a sharp turn, like those documentaries that change scenes without warning, and the story of Judah and Tamar appears. A complex human episode full of uncomfortable silences. Judah loses his sons and Onan, and Tamar is trapped between family duty and abandonment. In her cunning, and I would almost say her dignified desperation, Tamar acts covertly to ensure the continuity of the lineage, and from that union are born Perez and Zerah, one of the most significant lineages in the entire tradition, because from Perez will descend none other than King David. It's as if the Torah reminds us that redemption sometimes springs from unexpected, even morally ambiguous, decisions. We return to Joseph, now in Egypt. In Potiphar's house, he prospers thanks to his integrity, an integrity so visible that Potiphar's wife decides to put it to the test. He refuses, and she, wounded in her pride, falsely accuses him. Joseph is thrown into prison. We might think this is his end, but the biblical narrative has a special knack for showing us that the abyss is, sometimes, the exact point where the ascent begins. In prison, Joseph interprets the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. One will be restored, the other executed. And, as often happens with those who see beyond, his words come true. However, the cupbearer forgets him. That almost tragic forgetfulness is a subtle reminder that even brilliant minds can be trapped in waiting until history decides to call them. And as we close this parashah, one is left with a powerful feeling. Life does not move in a straight line. It moves in spirals, in breaks, in unexpected turns. Dreams mingle with betrayals. Downfalls prepare the way for future crowns. And each character, Jacob, Joseph, the brothers, Tamar, Judah, teaches us in their own way that identity is built not only on what we experience, but on how we respond to those moments when the soul is put to the test. The final lesson is simple yet profound. Even when it seems the world is falling apart, history continues to weave meaning. And as the Midrash Rabbah says in Genesis, the righteous man falls 7 times and rises again. Joseph falls, but his fall is not a fall. It is a prelude. And perhaps, in our lives, it is too. Let me tell you this, as if we were in the first scene of a class, where a single word opens up an entire universe. Because Vayeshev, as it appears at the beginning of the parashah, is not just a verb. It's almost a narrative sigh, a change of pace, a silent declaration of what is to come. And, as often happens in the Torah, the smaller the word, the more noise it makes in the story. Vayeshev comes from the Hebrew root Yah-veh, a 3-letter root that, curiously, can mean very different things depending on the context. It can speak of sitting, remaining, dwelling, settling. It's a word that describes both the humble gesture of bending the knees and the transcendental act of building a home. And in the Vayetol form, that typical narrative mode of biblical Hebrew where the famous va opens the doors to the next chapter. It simply means, and he settled. And here the Torah says, Vayéshev Yaakov, Vayéshev Yaakov, Jacob settled. If you think about it, it's both beautiful and cruel at the same time, because Jacob, after decades of struggles, deceptions, flights, and reconciliations, finally wants to sit down. He wants to reside, he wants to dwell, he wants to breathe. The Midrash even suggests that he was seeking a little domestic peace, a spiritual retreat, an emotional Shabbat. And just when he sits down, the story explodes with Joseph, with dreams, with tunics, with betrayals. It's as if the Torah is winking at us and saying, sitting down doesn't always mean rest. Sometimes it means that something is about to move. In rabbinic literature, yeshiva, from the same root, is much more than the image of students sitting in front of a teacher. Yeshiva, literally, is permanence. It is continuity. The Talmud uses the idea of sitting to describe a stable presence, a being that is not fleeting. When the sages speak of Yeshivat HaShekinah, the dwelling place of the divine presence, they were not referring to a fleeting moment, but to a deep, persistent settlement, almost rooted in history. That is why Vayeshev is not simply Jacob sat down. No, it is Jacob thought he had arrived at solid ground. He believed that the stage of wandering was over. He believed he could stay, remain, settle down. And precisely there, in that apparent repose, begin the turbulences that will define the story of Joseph and, without exaggeration, the destiny of the people of Israel. And here appears the most delightful linguistic irony. The root that expresses stability is the one that inaugurates one of the most unstable chapters of the entire patriarchal narrative. It is the Torah reminding us that life does not conform to our expectations, that sometimes, when we finally sit down, the world decides to stand up. So the next time you read Vayeshev, don't see it as a simple introductory verb. Read it as the prelude to a journey, as that moment when one thinks they have found rest, and destiny tells them that there is still history to be written. Because as the sages say, true permanence is not physical, it is spiritual. And perhaps, just perhaps, Jacob needed to move again so that we could learn this. Now I'm going to reveal a concept that is implicit in this lesson. In Hebrew, lashebet means to sit, and that is the root of Vayeshev, today's lesson, which we translate as to settle down. And the most important prayer in Judaism and the Torah is the Amidah, which means standing or upright. And although its fundamental meaning is to show respect by standing while praying before God, it also gives us the message to elevate ourselves, to keep moving forward, not to sit down. So there are moments in the Torah that seem written to reveal a little secret about the human soul. Vayéshev Yaakov is one of them. It seems like a calm, almost innocent phrase, but if you listen carefully, you hear a creak, a tension, a warning. And the sages, with their keen sense for detecting spiritual movements, read in this opening something much deeper than a simple geographical relocation. Rashi, following Bereshit Rabbah, gives us one of those lines that remain etched forever. Bikesh Yaakov leshev beshalva, kafatz alav rogzo shel Yosef. Jacob wanted to settle down in tranquility, and the storm of Joseph leaped upon him. It's an almost cinematic image. The patriarch, already old, tired of the traces left by Esau, Laban, the pain over Dinah, finally wants a corner of peace. He doesn't ask for greatness. He doesn't ask for trophies. He asks for a respite. And right there, the biblical narrative responds with a slamming door. Dreams, tunics, jealousy, disappearances, screams. Egypt. But the Midrash doesn't stop at the anecdote. It offers us something even more provocative, a kind of divine complaint. Do the righteous want tranquility? Isn't the reward of the world to come enough for them that they also desire calm here? It's harsh, almost uncomfortable. One hears those words and thinks, doesn't the righteous person deserve a rest? But the Midrash insists that Tzaddik was not placed in this world to live a spiritual retirement. He was placed there to grow, to be challenged, to move forward, to transform, even when he would have preferred to remain seated. And this is where the rabbinic tradition refines the message with a fascinating Talmudic echo. In Berachot 64a, we read, Talmidei Chachamim, Torah scholars, have no rest either in this world or in the next. As it is said, they will go from strength to strength. Psalm 84:8. It is a phrase that, read superficially, might seem like a condemnation, but the Hebrew Mechail el Hail, from strength to strength, does not speak of exhaustion, but of evolution, of a soul destined to grow without limit, like a flame that never ceases to burn. Seen in this light, Vayéshev Yaakov is almost a poetic warning. Absolute stability is not the path of the righteous. Not because God desires suffering, that reading would be simplistic and cruel, but because life itself, in its mystery, pushes forward. Total stillness is stagnation. The soul needs movement, challenge, creative tension. The tzaddik who tries to stop too soon risks ceasing to be a tzaddik, not morally, but existentially. And then the story of Joseph becomes the engine of a new cycle. Jacob wanted to stay. Life tells him that there is still a mission to fulfill. The fraternal conflict, the sale, the descent into Egypt. All of that is not punishment, but transition. It is the preparation for the great narrative of exile and redemption. The family that moves, suffers, and learns will become centuries later a people that liberates others from their chains. The lesson, if you allow me to translate it into everyday language, is almost an aphorism. When the soul becomes too comfortable, history pushes you forward. Vayéshev Yaakov reminds us that tranquility is beautiful, but sometimes deceptive. That inner peace is not always found in soft armchairs, but in wise movement. That life does not ask us for tranquility, but for purpose. So the next time you feel like everything is too still, maybe it's not a problem. Maybe it's an invitation, a gentle voice whispering, there's still a way forward. Because, as the Talmud says, the righteous do not stand still. They simply go from strength to strength, like someone learning
to walk forward, even when the world seems to want them to sit down.
At this point, we've reached the halfway mark of this class, so we're taking a short break to let you know that if you're willing to make a donation, you can do so by scanning the QR code you see on the screen, or by clicking the link below in the description of this video. Personally, I, Abel Flores, sincerely thank you for your contribution, because it helps us a lot in continuing to produce all this content, which is free for everyone, and thus giving more people the opportunity to learn about these ancient teachings. You can also help us a lot by subscribing to this channel, La Mishna TV, giving us a like, and sharing this video on your social media and messaging apps. Thank you very much. Also, you should know that on our website, lamishna.com, you will find all these classes, supporting materials, texts, articles, reports, and supplementary information for our free course on the Mishna. Now, don't go anywhere, because we're continuing with our class. The sages, with their unfailing spiritual radar, tell us, beware. Every time scripture says Vayeshev, something breaks, something shifts, something becomes unstable. And tradition formulates it in a memorable line attributed to Rabbi Yochanan bar Napaha. Whenever scripture uses Vayeshev, it foreshadows trouble. It's as if the biblical text is warning us. When a character decides to settle down too much, when they stop moving, history shakes their foundations. Look at the first example, Vayéshev Yaakov. Jacob wants stability, a little peace after an intense life. But as soon as he settles down, the storm begins. The hatred between brothers, Joseph's dreams, the sale into slavery, the descent into Egypt. Here it's not just the Midrash cited by Rashi. There's a whole Amoraic tradition seeing the pattern. Vayeshev announces family crisis and also the prelude to exile. Second example, Vayeshev Israel Shittim. The people settle down, get comfortable, and immediately fall into immorality and idolatry. The verse is almost devastating. And Israel settled in Shittim, and the people began to prostitute themselves with the daughters of Moab. Midrashim like Ruth Rabbah and Tanhuma say it bluntly. Too much comfort opens the door to moral transgression. And the plague that follows is a direct consequence of that spiritual complacency. Third example, Vayeshev Israel be'eretz Mitzrayim. The people settle in Goshen, a fertile and safe place. And immediately afterward, the Torah announces the death of Jacob, and in the next generation, the beginning of slavery. Tradition reads it this way: when Israel becomes too comfortable in a foreign land, it ends up forgetting that it is not their final destination. The Vayeshev in Egypt is the narrative prelude to oppression. Fourth example, in the time of Solomon, Vayeshev Yehuda veYisrael laveta. Everyone was at peace, each under their own vine and fig tree. It sounds idyllic, but later, Hadad the Edomite appears, raised up as an adversary. Once again, the dynamic is the same. When peace turns into complacency, stability crumbles from within. So the rabbinic rule is not superstition. It is spiritual psychology. Vayeshev describes not only a physical place, but a state of the soul. The moment when one settles down, falls asleep, disconnects from their mission, and life, or the biblical narrative, which for the sages is the same school, pushes forward even if it hurts. The lesson in 3 minutes and with all its force would be this. In Judaism, the danger lies not in conflict, but in the comfort that numbs. When the text says Vayeshev, someone lets their guard down, and history takes care of reminding them that there is still a path to follow, a purpose to fulfill, and growth to achieve. Because absolute tranquility is not the destiny of the righteous, but a pause that should never become a permanent residence. When we explore this rabbinic pattern of Vayeshev equals problems, we discover that it is not limited to the classic cases. The sages broaden their perspective and find the same dynamic in other biblical episodes where the act of settling down mysteriously seems to foreshadow a breakdown. It is as if the Torah is warning us that excessive stability, when it becomes an emotional refuge, sets the stage for a fall. Consider the Tower of Babel. The text says, ... and they settled there in the plain of Shinar. And immediately afterward comes the famous decision: let us build ourselves a city and a tower. It is not just any tower. It is a project of collective arrogance, an attempt to freeze heaven in brick. The seemingly neutral act of settling down is transformed into the prelude to the greatest act of disunity in all of ancient humanity, the confusion of languages and the universal dispersion. Here, settling down is synonymous with becoming stagnant in a worldview that excludes God. Another example, Lot. The text describes that Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, slowly moving his tents towards Sodom. It is an attractive, comfortable, economical, almost irresistible residence. But the following verse strikes us with the truth. The men of Sodom were wicked. Lot's settlement, born of the desire for well-being, drags him into a moral crisis that culminates in a desperate escape, surrounded by fire and smoke. Settlement, a prelude to destruction. The conclusion of all these examples is profound and, in a way, unsettling. The word Vayeshev is not negative in itself. It is not a grammatical condemnation. What the sages detect is a spiritual pattern. When the narrative emphasizes that someone settles down, that they find absolute security, that they become comfortable, the story usually prepares a crisis. Not because tranquility is bad, but because life and the Torah are suspicious of comfort that numbs. Too perfect stability can become a forgetting of purpose. It is an elegant and wise reminder. In the world of the Bible, and perhaps in our own, true growth does not occur when we settle down, but when we keep walking, even from a seated position. If we take the phrase Vayéshev Yaakov and examine it under the microscope of the great commentators, we discover that it is not just grammar. It is existential theology. Ramban, Nachmanides, points out a subtle detail. The Torah says, Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei aviv. Esau already has his own land, a consolidated inheritance. Jacob, on the other hand, dwells in the land where his father was a ger, a foreigner. That is to say, although the text says he settled, in reality he remains a stranger. He is seated, but he is not the owner. Settled, but in prolonged exile. Ramban, without saying it in modern style, is saying, even when the Jew seems settled in this world, his profound identity remains that of a historical and spiritual wanderer. The Kli Yakar goes a step further in the tension of the verse. He asks, why mix Vayeshev with Megurei Aviv? Either everything is in terms of settlement, or everything is in terms of exile. But the Torah combines Vayeshev, to settle, to seek comfort, Megurei Aviv, temporary residence, exile. His homiletic reading is powerful. Jacob tries to move from the role of Ger to that of Yoshev, from the exiled to the settled. And right there the conflict of Joseph erupts. Translated, it was not yet the historical moment to let down one's guard. Ord HaChaim and the Hasidic masters refine it even further. Vayeshev speaks not only of geography, but of a desire for menucha, for complete inner rest, in a world that was designed for continuous spiritual work. When the tzaddik seeks total tranquility here, heaven reminds him that true menucha is in the olam haba, and that in this world, the model is yelchu mechayil el chayil, to go from strength to strength. In other words, to put it simply, every time Yaakov wants to settle down as if this reality were definitive, God whispers to him, sometimes with affection, sometimes with earthquakes, "You are still on your way. Don't consider finished what I have not yet brought to a close." Now, if I had to conclude this entire journey with this final thought, I would do it like this, almost like someone lighting a last candle and looking at the room in a different light. The phrase, every time it says Vayeshev, problems arise, is not a mathematical rule. It's not that every time the Torah mentions the root yashav, the sky falls. The sages never thought of it that way. What they do, and here lies their pedagogical genius, is take certain paradigmatic cases where the text emphasizes the act of settling down, of establishing oneself with almost absolute calm, and show that in those moments, the biblical narrative prepares a turning point. It's not statistics, it's spiritual teaching. Vayeshev becomes a symbol, a metaphor for the human temptation to say, I'm done, I've arrived, I can now live without tension. And the Torah, faithful to its age-old wisdom, shows us that these overly comfortable pauses usually precede forced growth. From this springs the great idea that permeates Rashi, the Midrash, and the Talmud. The tzaddik, righteous person, does not come to this world to seek spiritual vacations. This world, say the sages, is for mission, risk, and action. Complete tranquility, absolute peace, belongs to the world to come. Here, even on the best days, life moves. And when one wants to freeze it in rest mode, heaven brings them back to the path through challenges that reactivate their purpose. Therefore, in all the examples we reviewed, the formula is the same. When Jacob settles down, the tragedy of Joseph erupts. When Israel settles down in Shittim, they fall into idolatry. When they settle in Goshen, slavery is prepared. When, in the time of Solomon, everyone lives securely under the vine and the fig tree, adversaries appear. Not because settling down is a sin, but because total comfort usually clouds moral consciousness and weakens the historical mission. Ramban and Kli Yakar express it with tremendous elegance. Even when we inhabit a land, we remain gerim, strangers with a purpose. Israel's identity is paradoxical. Residence, yes, but always in transit. Vayeshev can make us forget this dual condition. That is why the Torah marks it as a moment of risk. And applied to human existence, the teaching shines with an almost brutal honesty. Vayeshev is the moment when one says, I've come this far, now I just want to rest. And tradition responds with tenderness and firmness. Be careful. In the life of the righteous, that phrase is often the prelude to a new ascent, a new turn of the spiral, almost always driven by a crisis that awakens, that reorders, that propels. In other words, do not fear the movements that disrupt your comfort. Sometimes they are not problems. Sometimes they are God reminding you that there is still a journey ahead. The teaching of Vayeshev is not a stagnation of residence, neither material nor spiritual, but whether we like it or not, according to the text of the Torah, this is often related to the place where we live, where we coexist. And although it may seem indirectly unrelated, it seems that in many cases, our environment and circumstances influence us more than we think. The Torah warns us about these things because it is the way, the truth, and eternal life. That's all for today's class. Until the next video. Shalom.